There you go.
Okay.
Right, you're back as the host.
I'm back.
Yep,
Okay.
and then you can share screen when you're ready.
Yeah.
And there we go.
Fantastic. Okay.
Okay, well, I'm going to welcome everybody to James's presentation. James can introduce himself, and he's got a number of slides to share, and hopefully at the end of this we'll have some good signposting ideas as to how to reach out towards and direct people who may be stuck in a cycle of substance abuse. The focus I've asked James to take primarily is that it's not that I think we're pretty much aware of all the issues that it can cause, but where there's perhaps knowledge lacking is how to respond and how to deal with the matters arising that we experience in our day-to-day work on the waterways. So James, I'll hand over to you and mute myself at this stage.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you, Mark. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out to join this. As Mark was saying, yeah, it would be great to have a discussion with you and try and maybe towards the end of the presentation, just try and get an idea of what some of the issues and challenges are you're facing on a day-to-day basis. And with some of the sort of knowledge that I have and the techniques we use here, how maybe you could incorporate that into your working. The first few slides are more about the effects, so I will skip over some of them. I'll just sort of gauge that, but from talking to Mark, yeah, I understand it's not so much about, what alcohol does. But let's introduce like us and myself. So I work at HAGA, and we're called HAGA and HRS. So we're based in Seven Sisters Road, London. That's our building. It's not the prettiest of buildings, but we've tried to paint the door to make it look a bit more appealing. So we're sort of between Finsbury Park and Manor House, for those that sort of know that area of North London. So what we do is provide support and advice for any Haringey residents who might be having difficulty with their alcohol. There is a service we work with called Insight Platform, who support young people and family, friends and carers of people dealing with addiction. So that covers the under 18s, but also we support people over 18 in the borough. Delivering structured treatment through either one-to-one, which would be key working sessions, or group therapy, which is a large part of what we do and what we find to be really effective in terms of getting people through that cycle of change is to engage them in group therapy, making them feel that they're not alone, that they're listened to, they're understood, and they can relate to others. So some of the things at the bottom there, I'll go on to explain a bit more about that. But early intervention and reduction of harm. So we understand, and I'm sure you've come across, there are people that maybe in our view are drinking too much. Probably, if they're honest, that they would say that, but they're not wanting to stop, and we have to recognize that some people don't want to achieve abstinence. That is one path which we support people with, but certainly reduced controlled drinking is something that we promote people to feel that they're sort of able to strive for, and not feel that it's a sort of all or nothing abstinence or not. Some of you might have heard sort of the 12-step programs, which are sort of abstinence based. We have programs here that promote abstinence, like groups that promote abstinence, but we don't necessarily say that's the only way. It's one option for people. So just to give you an idea of like what we do on a day-to-day basis. So we're open Monday to Friday. this would be a similar program for other drug alcohol services in boroughs of London, I suppose. But specifically for us, we have different groups which target people at different stages of their what we'd call the cycle of change. So whether they're in sort of the ambivalent stage, contemplating change, even pre-contemplating, so not really even aware there's a problem, or at a point of wanting to make a decision to change. So the different groups reflect the different stages of people's journey. We've got a large, well, how engaging massively diverse borough. It would be great if we could have more sort of specific demographic groups, but we do have Polish group at the moment and an LGBTQI group. We're looking to sort of integrate more with the Somali community in Haringey. And I guess just on that note, the reason I'm talking to you is that we recognise that there are an awful lot of communities that have needs that are unmet, and we're wanting to sort of try and be innovative and think outside the box in terms of reaching out to people who might otherwise slip through the net and you know, under the radar. We have a rough sleepers worker, but I understand, you know, people on the waterways and canals wouldn't necessarily fall into that. Well, wouldn't fall into that category, I suppose, an awful lot of the time. So, but from what I understand, and it would be useful to get your input, it's not always an idyllic life, sort of pootling along the canals, and there are issues that come along with it and pre-existing issues. So, yeah, let's just go on to, so there are two sort of strands to our service. There's HAGA, which is for people who are sort of at the beginning of their journey, and then HRS, which is the recovery service, looks at getting people back into maybe work, volunteering, education, and co-production, which is something that we're trying to push for. So actually sort of having peer-led groups, having sort of service users who have come through the program actually then taking the role in creating sort of the structure of the groups, and all around really giving autonomy and self-efficacy for people, which is often lost in, you know, in addiction. So let's just this is great, it's all being recorded, but that would be our referral form, so you can download it through that link and email it to us there. Clients can self-refer or be referred by any professional. In fact, when I say professional, I mean they can be referred by anyone really. We're not fussy. We'll take referrals and then screen them, gain more information if we need to. So in terms of sort of treatment options for people that come to the service, and I suppose anyone really who's going through addiction issues or whatever, you know, however we word it, which is another sort of topic in terms of how we talk to people about the issues they're going through. But the sort of options they have are sort of fall into three categories. The more sort of alcohol dependent users, for which we'll do a sort of screening. It's called the SADQ, Severity of Alcohol Dependence Questionnaire, which is the sort of NHS recognised questionnaire which will screen for actual dependence of alcohol. So if that is evident, then a community detox or a residential based detox would be appropriate. So we have an alcohol nurse who will get clients involved with that, set them up with that. They would come to us on a daily basis for the community detox. And obviously we have links to lots of residential treatment centres in London and the South East. And I'm just aware, when I'm saying all this, because I'm aware you're from all over the country, I'm pretty sure this would be a general sort of structure for a lot of drug and alcohol services in terms of the streams of where clients would fit into. Then the higher risk clients would be encouraged. I mean, they'll all have key workers, so they'd meet with them on a one-to-one basis. They'd also be encouraged to attend group. So going back to the timetable, the group work program that we have. We also have counselling, some qualified addictions counsellors, which mainly focus on motivational interviewing, which is something we'll go over a bit later on, but it's a quite effective way of getting people to find their own reasons for change. So motivational interviewing is something that is used by all of our staff, but particularly by the counsellors. And then IBA and EBI, these are for clients who maybe are at increasing risk, who score quite low on the alcohol dependent scale, but they're evidence-based, short, structured conversations around alcohol consumption to help motivate and support people to change. So again, it's sort of come from NICE guidelines, National Institute of Clinical Excellence, so NHS sort of based, and it's really, the idea is that anyone sort of seeking support or guidance around alcohol drug misuse can be given this in a sort of 5-10 minute conversation. So really just asking them if it's okay to talk about alcohol use, giving them sort of the choice to sort of say yes or no, and then asking them some questions around actual consumption, unit intake, and harm minimization. So we'll go on to that in a couple of slides' time. This is one definition of addiction. I'm not going to labor on this. There are lots of different definitions, but if anyone has any opinions or sort of views on how people that you meet react to or would define themselves or doesn't like defining themselves as an addict, it's sometimes quite an important sort of point of discussion, certainly with clients I've seen that come into groups, like what makes you an addict, what makes you someone with an alcohol issue. My experience is really, people can really only diagnose themselves. It's not really something that is easily put on someone else through a sort of checklist of things. And of course, we sort of deal with alcohol and work with the parent organisation in Haringey called The Grove, who help people with drug addictions, but there's an awful lot of addictions, an increasing number of addictions, substance, but also behavioural. The obvious behavioural addiction is gambling. You're not ingesting a substance to change your reality or the way you feel, but you're taking an action, a behaviour, and there are lots of other ones there as well. And it's important to be mindful of that, we find, in terms of cross addiction and working out sometimes actually what is someone's primary addiction. And they might present as having alcohol as the main issue, but actually when you dig a bit deeper, there's another addiction that can be fueling that. So yeah, it's always useful to be aware of the wide range of addictions. I'm not going to go through this too much. So obviously there are lots of different reasons people find for drinking, good or bad. Football team wins, football team loses, it's raining, it's sunny. essentially people will find a justification for their actions. And there are also a variety of drinkers. Obviously, we see an awful lot of all of these types of drinkers. Some would at first sort of seem less worrying than others, but I suppose one theory is that addiction it's a progressive illness, disease. Arguably, the disease model of addiction is out there for you to research, but after work drinkers, people start out as having a couple of drinks after work, and it progresses to the last one to leave, the first one to arrive, and we hear that story an awful lot. I'm sure when you speak to people, they never set out with the intention of smashing their lives to bits through alcohol or drugs. It wasn't a sort of conscious decision. But yeah, they can become the everyday drinkers, as you see at the bottom now. So again, as Mark was saying, we won't go through all of these. I'm sure you're aware of all that massive, variety of different physical harms that alcohol does, not to mention the psychological harms. But if anyone wants to jump in or has any questions, please do feel free. So as part of the alcohol nursing team here, we will always offer a liver scan. We also have people from the Royal Free Hospital coming in to do regular liver tests, liver health function tests, but we will always offer that as part of the assessment. So obviously liver is one of the organs that is most noticeably and drastically affected. So just a little bit about units. So I'm just aware of the time. Just a little bit about the units. I find it useful. I mean, I didn't know any of this really. I mean, I kind of knew what a unit of alcohol was, but I found it really useful to have this sort of quite clear in my mind, because it helps when I'm having these sort of quite brief, potentially tricky conversations with clients, or for your case, people that you see on the rivers, being able to sort of just know in your head, well, when they say, oh, I'm just having like half a bottle of vodka a day, like what actually is that? How do I work that out? Or a few cans of Tennant Super, what does that mean? It's not something you can like quickly sort of just know, but essentially the guidance is 14 units. So again, as part of that IBA, identification and brief advice, it would be to sort of try and get from them what they're drinking, what that equates to in units, give them the information of what is the recommended number of units, which is 14 now. For men and women, it used to be slightly different, but I think for ease of just sort of ease of use, it's just been 14 units per week, and give that information to them and let them sort of think on that. It's not for us to sort of say that's way too much. I don't know what people's views are on 14 units per week. I mean, I don't drink, but I did, and I would certainly feel that it's not a massive amount of 6 pints of beer over a week. I suppose what is important is that it's spread out. It's often people will say, well, I only drink sort of 15, 16 units, but that might be a bottle and a half of wine on a Saturday night and then nothing else until Wednesday. But that large amount of units in one sort of sitting is really unhealthy for the liver, which is what it processes the units of alcohol. So it roughly takes a unit, 1 hour for the liver process 1 unit of alcohol. So in terms of working out the units of alcohol, not to go into too much maths here, but essentially a litre of any liquid, alcoholic liquid, if you know what percentage that, like a pint of beer is sort of 5%, a bottle of wine is maybe 9%, 10%. If you know what the alcohol percentage of that liquid is, then a litre of that is whatever the percentage is. So a litre of 9% wine would be 9 units. Yeah, so a litre of 40% vodka would be 40 units, so on. So in terms of cans of beer, sort of half a litre. So if someone's saying they drink 4 cans of beer, to me that's 2 litres. And if that beer is 5%, then that's 5% of a litre, that's 5 units, so that's 10 units. Often it's stronger beer, so it's important to try and establish these high strength Polish beers moved away a bit from the sort of Pennant Super and cold special brew. But yeah, it does make a big difference because it jumps from sort of 4% to potentially 10, 12% even for some cans of beer. So yeah, 1 litre of any drink contains the same number of units as the ABV, which is the alcohol percentage. 1 unit, 1 hour for the liver. So again, this is all information that we can give to people that we see in terms of like it taking 1 hour. Obviously, if they've had a couple of bottles of wine and then fallen asleep at night, when they wake up in the morning, the alcohol is still going to be processed in the system, being processed in their system. So that may affect their sort of clarity of thought, decision making, etc. As I mentioned before, in terms of client goals, we recognize that people don't just want to achieve abstinence. Some people are looking to reduce and control. Even just learn more about it, start to sort of increase their knowledge about what alcohol does, and start to sort of feel more comfortable having conversations. I sort of find a lot of people that walk through the door here, I think sometimes we can forget that, I can forget, I should say, that they've probably been sort of battling and turning this problem over in their head for years before we ever see them, so giving them a space to sort of express what's been going on for them, and how it's affected them is really important. And this comes to group work, I suppose. We do find, and it'd be interesting to know sort of if there are what your sort of thoughts are on trying to engage people that you see in sort of group work as opposed to this more sort of one-to-one conversation we can have with them. But really, I think a lot of the change comes from them learning about themselves through group work, and finding that identification with others who are going through the same issue. So we really emphasize that, and it comes.
Sorry, Ben, just to jump in there, I actually am a course leader for a group called Taste Life UK, which deals with eating disorders.
Okay.
And again, I can't emphasize enough how group work is key.
Yeah.
Because we've seen that is how we get the results. That is how people stick to the plan. That is how people stick to it after they've done the plan. It's because safety in numbers.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Donna. Yeah, definitely. And a lot of what a big issue around addiction is isolation and lack of connection. Through whatever reasons, families stop wanting to see you, friends give up on you, partners leave, walk out, and having a place where people feel they can come, or, you know, a group of people they feel they can come and share honestly with, is massive. You know, you see the eyes light up in people when they realize, you know, they're not alone, and they've got a space to sort of be heard. So yeah. And stigma, yeah, it comes down to stigma, I suppose. Letting people know that this is this is taken from, I'm sure some of you may have heard of Brené Brown. She's quite a well-known, she's done a lot of TED Talks and things. Psychologist, sort of motivational talker, talks about empathy and accepting other people's perspectives as truth, staying out of judgment, how we can do that. So there's an intro, there's a video that I normally play, but it's quite lengthy, but it's about sort of, the analogy is, if you see someone falling down a well, you know, in a hole, we don't sort of look down and say, oh, I'm really sorry, that looks terrible. You know, we try and get down there with them as best we can, and experience it ourselves, or at least get on a level where we can sort of try to find out what it's like. And that can be, you know, easier said than done. And I think, going back to what Donna was saying, that's why group work is really important, because sometimes as practitioners, we just don't have that experience. And I think being honest about our limitations in that is really important. I mean, I would say at HAGA here, probably 50 to 60% of the staff have some sort of personal experience with recovery, which I think is great. It's not essential to be, you know, an effective staff member, but I think it's useful to have that option for people. But yeah, so going back to group work and getting people to feel that they're not alone. And I guess one thing, we're actually starting a new sort of process group, which is really, the emphasis is on also not just sort of letting people feel that they're heard and that they're not alone, but for people who are maybe a little bit further along and a bit more stable and able to sort of start to look at some of their triggers, and through working in a group, often we find that, and what we're trying to do in this new group is enable people to learn about themselves and their reactions, and what sort of, maybe what triggers them, what doesn't feel quite right, how they respond to other people in a sort of safe environment, because then that can be quite useful learning for when they sort of take that out into the real world, as it were, into a new workplace, or, you know, college, university, those sort of things. So yeah, that's sort of connecting with ourselves, learning about ourselves. I feel that comes a little bit later on. I think sometimes, especially with a lot of our clients, you know, they've gone through some really traumatic experiences, either through the drinking or drugs, but often the drinking and drugs are sort of consequence or a reaction to traumatic events. So for them to be at a stage where it's sort of safe for them, sort of therapeutically safe for them to start to unpick some of that, is important. But it can be really useful. So a bit more about sort of having conversations about drugs and alcohol with people. It would be interesting. I've just put all these things up, and it'd be interesting to maybe get some of your perspectives on some of these. I'm quite transparent with people, you know, that walk through the door, that recovery is change, you know, like, it does involve change, and it is about changing the way you feel, the way you react to the world, and that's a process. and it's a cycle, going back to that sort of cycle of change. People are at different stages and they can move from one to the other and back, from being ready to make decisions to action, and then going back to denial because something has triggered them in that decision-making stage that is fearful for them. So they go back into that sort of idea of, it's not a problem, it's fine. And rolling with that sort of resistance is a key motivational interviewing technique to understand that the clients that we see aren't just sort of not motivated or sort of in denial. They're constantly being, their decisions are constantly driven by a multitude of different emotions. Fear of change, what will I be if, a lot of people will have been drinking for decades, how do I function without a drink? How will I talk to people? How will I sit with myself? All these sort of things. So being mindful that change is really integral, but it's a process and it takes time. In terms of what we can try and avoid, I'm sure some of you don't need to be told this, but it's useful. I think sometimes I get into the habit, I find myself sort of accidentally using yes/no questions. We use them a lot in day-to-day talking with friends, family, just getting information. Are you okay? Do you want this? Does that sound good? But it's when we've got a limited amount of time to sort of work with someone, maybe a small opportunity to have a conversation, really these open-ended questions of how, what, when were really useful, because I find again, it comes back to the not denial, but the almost like the addict voice. We'll try and find the easier way. So if someone's just asking you yes/no questions, it's just an opportunity to sort of give quick answers, get away from the situation, don't want to talk about that, want to carry on with the drinking, the drug, and it's almost like two sides of the person, I find. So really trying to encourage them to talk from the heart, to talk about how they're feeling is important. Sorry. These why questions, so they can be really useful to get information and to maybe dig a bit deeper, but it's gauging with some people. It can feel accusational, and almost sort of assume a certain level of assumption on our part. For example, why do you feel you always need to do that? Why do you always feel you need to have that drink in the morning before you go to work? It's assuming a certain level of things that can for some clients sort of put their back up. So I would try and avoid it myself. I do try to avoid why questions. You avoid using emotive language such as struggle or angry unless you're repeating what you've been told. So there's again like sort of that idea of saying back to the person what they've said to you, letting them know that they've been heard is fine, but assuming that if they're appearing frustrated, that they're angry or they're annoyed. It's another emotive word that sometimes can be a trigger, that sometimes can be unhelpful in sort of opening that relationship, keeping that relationship open. So trying to avoid using emotive language that hasn't been used by the client, I find useful and is suggested really through the sort of motivational interviewing research to be very useful to try and avoid argumentation. I mean, sometimes it's really frustrating, I'll be honest, as a key worker and as a counsellor, sometimes I feel like I want to tell them what I think they should do and what is best for them, and they'll come back and say, well, I can't, and then it can sometimes be easy to get into this, well, if you did this, well, I can't do that, well, what about this? And it's this sort of argumentative tone, which again, I think it just drives a wedge between the person and the person trying to help. It can be, again, like once you get to know them a bit better, it can be useful to sort of challenge people a little bit and sort of challenge assumptions maybe they're making about themselves and their lives and relationships. But I guess, certainly on initial meetings, it's useful to try and avoid. And the last one, highlighting discrepancies. So if you can get through these open-ended questions, people talking, quite quickly they can realize that, okay, like this person actually wants to listen to what I've got to say, and they feel quite empowered, and often, they're in a situation where they're isolated, they don't have that person that wants to listen. They can start to talk about quite a lot, and often if you listen, there are discrepancies in what they're saying. So on one hand, they might say, well, I feel I really need to have a drink before I see my friends because it's what I've always done, and it relaxes me, it makes me more talkative. But then a couple of sentences later, they might disclose that they embarrassed themselves, or one of their friends, they got in an argument with one of their friends, and then putting that sort of gently reflecting that back to them and saying, so, on one hand, you're saying, you find it useful because it's relaxing, but then on the other hand, so almost creating that discrepancy for them to see, because sometimes in their mind it's not so clear for them to unpick it. But if we can reframe sort of two maybe opposing things back to them, I find can be really useful, and I use it all the time, certainly in my counselling. It also gives autonomy to the person, so it's not just saying, well, you shouldn't need to have a drink before you see your friends. It's saying, well, I hear what you're saying and I appreciate that, but I also acknowledge that it was upsetting for you to have that argument with your friends. So I'm wondering how that feels, makes you feel that there are those two sort of conflicting things. So it can be a really useful technique to let people sort of find their own reasons for change and find their own sort of motivation, I suppose. Right.
Can I jump in there with a question, please?
Yeah, hi, Chris.
Yeah, it's just if someone really doesn't accept or realise they have got a drink problem. I mean, they clearly have to everybody around them, but to themselves they don't see it. How could you address that and try and raise that in a sensitive way so you don't cause ongoing harm?
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Chris. It's super difficult. There are a couple of slides coming up which will address that a little bit in terms of how we view that person. To be honest, if someone can't see it, it doesn't mean that they're not willing to. It just means that they can't. Now, what do we do to enable them to see it? Well, firstly, I go through the sort of IBA, the helping them to work out what they're drinking, how much they're drinking, how that compares to what would be a healthy amount. if they still feel, so just to ask Chris, do you feel that there are people that acknowledge that they're drinking too much but just don't want to make a change, or do you feel that they don't actually think
It's
that?
their health. Their health is, they have had diagnosis to do with the liver. I can't remember the wording used for the diagnosis, but it wasn't cirrhosis. So
it was, or it wasn't. Yeah.
it wasn't said as cirrhosis, but I've looked at the
Yeah.
words, and basically it is a medical jargon that says cirrhosis. And since then, they've had a serious fall and had brain damage due to a bleed on the brain. But still, they won't see that they need to. It's, the family around them have tried to get him to accept and look for help, but he's gone back to his room, and that's it. Sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's so tricky, and it's really sad, and we see it a lot, with people who, to anyone else, it would appear obvious, there's a bit in it's actually in one of the 12-step books about a jaywalker, and if it's an American thing, but if someone was like jaywalking and keeps getting injured through walking out in front of cars, and it progressively got worse, that they would stop. But there's often a block with addiction, that because it's tied into mental health, and for this individual, I mean, I think you do have to take everyone as individual. For this person, it could be that actually they need to get to a point where they realize they often, when you were talking about with family and stuff, I think sometimes that can be almost like perpetuating the problem. Sometimes with family sort of always being there and sort of helping and trying to get people out of this situation. Often for someone in the addiction, what they hear is, it doesn't matter what you do, we'll still always love you and we'll be there for you. And it's almost like a green light to carry on going. So sometimes what's useful for people is to sort of hit that rock bottom where they realize that actually they're on their own and no one's going to get them out of this. It needs to be themselves. It sounds harsh, but for some people, honestly, that's what they need. I guess for some people, it's if the drinking is extremely heavy, and it has been for a long time, sometimes in terms of thinking about cognition, and are they actually in a position to understand fully the consequences? Sometimes that can be a factor. Certainly if they're sort of long-term heavy drinkers. One of the big things I think is to give them hope by allowing them to see other people who have been at that point of despair, ending up in hospitals, A&E, falling over, hurting themselves, losing finances, that have been in that position and climbed out of that. Because often people that have gone to that level feel that really they're the only ones, that there's no one else that has been, where they've been, and giving them hope that there are people that are out there. So yeah, it's not simple. I wish it was. Let's know for people who are what we sometimes refer to, in denial. It can be extremely hard. Magic couple of sentences or techniques. I think it is just keeping on letting them know that you're ready to work with them when they're ready. That we're not going anywhere, sort of thing. often there's not a lot of sort of consistency and regularity in their lives at that point, and let them know that, you know, we are here for you. Here's my number. Here's how you can contact me, you know, making it as simple as possible. And then otherwise giving, you know, harm minimalization advice. You know, often at that stage, it is really about, you know, because the reality is an awful lot of people don't make it. And, you know, basic advice like, please make sure you have food in your fridge, you know, make sure your phone is charged. You know, I understand that you're not going to stop drinking and your plan is to go into your room and drink, but, you know, make sure you have your phone on you, make sure at least someone knows where you are, that sort of thing. And that can be, you know, you'll find that's people are quite receptive to that, because you're not, you know, you're being level, you're being open with them and saying, look, I know where you are and that you're not magically going to stop, but let's try and keep you safe, as safe as possible.
Thank you.
All right. I'm just aware of the time. We've got about 15 minutes. There are a couple more slides, but I'm wondering whether, Mark, I don't know what you think, maybe potentially open it up to sort of questions and comments.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
I've got a question that kind of picks up from the thing that Chris has launched, and this is a real case that various people have been trying to reach out. It's on my patch that I'm still looking after, even in my current role until I have a successor. But a person who was living on a boat, heavy drinking day in, day out. Basically, the boat is unlivable. He now lives in his car. An alcohol charity like yourselves in the borough where I live is actively reaching out, and their approach is to say, we've got a nurse ready to see you. All you need to do is get in a taxi and come to town, basically, from where he keeps the boat. Now, whenever they send the taxi for him, he disappears. But if you go down there, you'll find him just sitting in his car all day, just drinking. And he's now sleeping in the car as well. His family's concerned about him. They live far away, in another part of England. And yet, no matter what we do, we can't get him to engage. I've said as a chaplain, I'm happy to facilitate accompanying a nurse to actually go and see him, because I think he might respond. But they say, no, we can't do anything outside our doors. The client has to come to us. We can't go to the client. But I think he's worried that if he leaves his current position and goes anywhere, the navigation authority might seize his boat because he hasn't paid his license forever, and the local authority might seize his car. You know, it's and I'm not quite sure how to address this. So it's these people who everyone's concerned about and everyone wants to help. And he would probably accept help, but if it was delivered to him where he is, rather than getting him to go to where it's offered.
And I suppose, I mean, it's a sad case, and it sounds like quite an extreme case. But what would help? What do you think help looks like for him in terms of, you know, actual therapeutic support or medical support?
I think medical support from an alcohol nurse might actually help him if it's delivered where he's at. And the problem is it's all offered on the basis of you must come to us. And I think I don't think he can bring himself to do that. I think he's well beyond that.
Yeah, so it is the case. So with our alcohol nurse, our nursing team, and it's sort of clinical sort of safety reasons that the medication that they give, I won't bore you with the names, but essentially it needs to be regularly monitored, and they need to be in a safe environment, and ideally with someone else who can support them for that community detox. So yeah, the nurse coming, because the nurse would have to come every day to his car and give him the medication. But once he's taken the medication, he would need to have someone supervising him, for reasons that, the medication is quite a fine line between the medication holding someone. Essentially, it replicates what alcohol does, but it needs to be monitored. So if he was in the hospital, for example, getting a medical detox on a ward, the nurses would be coming every hour doing what's called a CWA test, which is checking his levels of shakiness, sweating, because obviously the risk of the medication not being tapered quite right, and him going into alcohol withdrawals, seizures, is a genuine risk. So it's hard because obviously, there's a sort of clinical / health and safety reason, I suppose, the alcohol nurse and the alcohol service, same with us, we wouldn't be able to give a community detox to someone living, in their car. What would I do in that situation? I would sort of try and talk to some rehabs, some residential rehabs, and get that as sort of far along the process as possible, and then present that to him, trying to find maybe a window of opportunity, maybe in the morning when he's not so drunk, to say, look, there's a rehab, they're willing to talk with you, maybe to accept you, because it sounds like for him, there's a lack of stability. I think a residential rehab is probably more suitable.
I think his family would also like that, but I think you've given me some ideas to work on, that I might be able to work with the Navigation Authority and provide him some sort of assurance that he's not going to lose his boat and his car if he goes into rehab. And
I mean, that would be helpful. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the technicalities of that with the boat certainly are.
The chaplaincy has a lot of clout with the navigation authorities. If we ask for something, they'll generally be amenable.
I suppose if you can demonstrate that he's, willing to engage in some sort of treatment. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else wanna say anything? Any questions?
And for Mark, really, what's his general health like? Oh, you're Mark.
I think he's about 69 years old, and for many months, the Navigation Authority, myself, and this alcohol charity have been trying to reach out to him, but we've not had any success. But what James has said about if we can provide some form of assurance to him that he won't lose what he's got, I think that might possibly help. So I will both go back to the charity and then also get the welfare officer at the Navigation Authority to get back in touch with his family and see if we can come up with a more cunning action plan.
Yeah, because I mean, I had a boater a couple of years ago who clearly needed to come off of alcohol, was desperate to come off of it, but there was no help as such around here. He couldn't just stop drinking because he would have been very ill. But he was taken ill and I had to call an ambulance for him, and they took him into hospital. And this was a huge answer to prayer, because while he was in hospital, they detoxed him as well. So he came out alcohol free, but that was the only way he got off, by being in a hospital environment. And they sort of gave him the care that he needed.
Thanks, Lorraine. I'm thinking it would be good if we kind of got to that point before it got to complete disaster. I think the concern is that a ranger or someone's going to find him dead in his car or something like that before we've been able to help him.
I mean, the other problem it's worth sort of mentioning is a lot of the people that we deal with live surrounded by other drinkers. And they're surrounded by other drinkers 24 hours a day, particularly in the nicer weather. They'll sit outside their boats and they all drink. And it's really difficult to sort of break that if you're one person and you're surrounded by other people that are doing it.
Yeah, and really, you know, we come across a similar type of problem with rough sleepers in Haringey.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm sure in all the boroughs, in all the cities in England, you know, that they sort of like stick together because it's a community in a sense. It's support, it's safety, but it also exasperates the issue and makes it harder for them to break out of it. So. We try, and I'm sure you do, try and engage with a lot of other services. So a lot of outreach, different community hubs around Haringey. Sorry, I think the sound just changed a bit. Can you hear me still? Yeah. You know, church halls, places where they can go and have food, you know, where they can potentially meet like-minded people who are at that point where they maybe want to start to meet other people who are looking to break out of that cycle. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, no problem.
Can you say I understand the frustration of we see so many people with alcohol problems who don't want help. What proportion? You've spoken about people who come to you for help. So what, for the number of people that you help, how many people are out there that need help? So like, are you helping 1 in 20 of people with alcohol problems, 1 in 50, 1 in 100?
Yeah.
Because we're with the 100 if you're with the 1.
You mean you're not helping nearly as many people as you see? Is that what you're saying?
We aren't helping. It's so frustrating because you don't get to help many people. You obviously are on the end where people are coming to you for help. We're at the end where we're trying to persuade people to go to people like you for help.
Yeah. I'd say, I mean, people that come to us are, yes, they're reaching out, but they can shift from, you know, they'll reach out because maybe their wife or partner said they'll leave them or they're about to lose their job. There's not always necessarily it's done for the fact that they want to change themselves, which is a challenge, but I hear what you're saying. So it's how do you reach or how do you let those people know that there is support out there for them? Do you feel that there is? I mean, for you, Rob, where are you based?
We're in Wiltshire. There's not a lot of help around.
Yeah, because
it's quite frustrating when someone pops up and they get to a point where they say, "I need some help." It's so frustrating not being able to find anything, even if they go into hospital. The hospital doesn't seem to be able to signpost them towards ongoing help.
In all honesty, I mean, I'm a bit. I've lived in London and grew up in London all my life. It's shocking to hear that, you know, a place like Yorkshire. I mean, crikey, it's not like the edge of the world that there aren't drug and alcohol services that are willing.
Sorry, Wiltshire. I said not Yorkshire.
Sorry, Wiltshire. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's. So when they go into hospital, presumably. Do they? I mean, if they go in and get an alcohol detox or go in for through injuring themselves, and it becomes apparent to the staff that it's alcohol related. Is there not a alcohol liaison nurse who would come and see them? Because that would sort of be the process in the hospitals around us.
No, we've had a friend who was discharged home, and well, he actually escaped in the end, I think, but he ended up totally out of touch with the system. The system, whilst he was in hospital, they were helping. The minute he stepped out of the door, he was alone, and so he has just gone back to where he was before, and has lost his home and is in a care home, and the same things happened there. We wonder about residential rehab for people like this person that would be able to take them out of their situation, as that other person said. Even wonder about us taking their boat somewhere into a safe place. If people would agree, we could do that.
Do you feel I mean, residential rehab can be really useful, but in one sense, it's a bit like a hospital admission in that maybe it can be for slightly longer period, but once they leave the residential rehab, similar to when they get discharged from the ward, it's like, where do they go from there? Do they have a plan? Do they have support? With this particular person, do you feel that there was just not the support sort of available and set up for them when they left the hospital? Or?
The support couldn't compete with the support of the other alcoholics.
Right. Okay. So it sounds like what you're saying, that so the person in question, the temptation to use with other alcoholics was greater than the temptation to access their support. Is that?
Yes, it's their choice.
And generally there's not a desire to change, so that's the frustrating thing.
And there might not be their desire to change that time, that hospital admission. Sometimes I get, it can be really frustrating, and I think, what are we really doing? Are we really making a difference? Because someone comes for a day or a week, and then they leave the service and you don't see them again for a few months, but then they come through the door again. And I try and always remember that even if we plant a tiny seed, letting them know, even if it's just one nice interaction with them when they do come and then they go off again, sometimes it's enough to, almost like a level of acceptance from us that, if they go back out there, maybe, we've done enough to plant a seed that encourages them to think, well, when they end up in hospital again, maybe this time I'll give those guys a go,
Is this a bit like what you're saying about keeping someone safe? So, let's say they've been in a program, or they haven't even been in a program, but they've got a severe drinking problem. You know that you can't fix that because you can't get them into rehab. You can't. So what is your feeling on doing things like ensuring they got food, or in our case, we ensure they got coal, wood, basically keeping them together? Does that, I've had some people say to me, oh, but you're enabling their drinking because now they'll just spend their money on drinking instead of on food. But what is your feeling on?
I feel I understand the issues of enabling. I mean, I'm more against the sort of enabling through almost more psychological sort of, we love you, whatever, we're here for you, from family. But I think the basics of making sure someone's got food in the fridge and is able to reach out to someone if, they're having a seizure. I think that's,
thank you.
I would say definitely, because I think they're going to drink either way, right? With those people, whether you give them some fuel for the fire or give them food, they're going to be drinking.
Come in with a question, please.
Sure.
Hello there. If I would always ask the question, have they been in the armed services? And then you kind of get the British Legion to come along or help. And if they're been in the armed services, then there's a sense of pride and, that sense of community loyalty, and then that's where you kind of work on that, and a sense of get the British Legion to perhaps give them some support. I'm sure they're there, all that sort of thing. I believe when I was a street pastor, there was this happening in Southend on the streets. An armed services kind of volunteer or supporting group. So I would always ask that question, because then you're kind of gaining that they're proud of that.
It's a way. It sounds like it's the sort of way in, and
yes, that's right.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's one example, and there are other things that, depending on that person and how they present, and maybe their age, their demographic, I think it's a skill that obviously it sounds like you have to sort of try and identify ways in to sort of build that relationship, that sense of maybe, trust, and
that's right.
Find ways for them to connect with others in a meaningful manner.
Right.
Christopher, thank you. Guys, I'm awfully sorry. I'm just aware, I've just seen the time. My colleagues are telling me that they need to shut the room, shut the doors.
Okay, well, thank you very much, James.
It would be great
really
to say,
appreciate it.
Yeah, and just to say, my email is on this. If I'm more than happy if you guys want to send me an email with any questions, and we can sort of have a back and forth. With any case specific things, I'm more than happy to sort of have conversations ongoing with any of you.
That's very helpful. Thank you, James. I think folk will appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely. And again, thank you for your time. And I think it's a great.
Will
it's lovely.
Also have your screens?
The slides. Yes, I'll send them to Mark.
Fantastic.
On a PDF, and then you can print them out. We'll just keep them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
All right. Have a lovely rest of the evening, everyone.
Thank you very much, James.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.